Welcome to the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse podcast. I am your host, Amy Helms. Each week, you will hear from experts across the country and even world speak to you on recovering from narcissistic abuse and even how to manage these relationships. You will also hear some periodic solo episodes on how to manage these relationships and what recovery is like. It is my hope that you will leave each episode with some renewed hope that you can and will beat this. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Today, I'm excited to welcome on as a guest, Alyssa Sullinger. Alyssa is in private practice right now as she is a licensed professional counselor. She works in clinical mental health and has been serving this field since 2015. She works in addiction, depression, trauma, and self-image. And over this time, she has found that, talk therapy takes us so far, but then there's this missing piece. And she has decided that there are things just take us up, a little bit further into that recovered life. And I'm excited to talk with her today and for her to share her wisdom with you as to what that missing piece can be. Alyssa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Mm-hmm. So tell us one fun fact about you.
Oh, a fun fact about me. I am a vegetarian. That's kind of fun, I guess.
How long have you been a vegetarian for?
I have been a vegetarian for about 8 years. I miss the meat very, very much, but I've been doing okay without it.
Mm-hmm. So, and you're from Pennsylvania, correct? So right now, I'm in South Carolina and everyone thinks 50 degrees is cold. So what will people there think?
Oh my gosh. So about a week ago, it was 9 degrees here. And now it's about 50 and it feels like it's summer to me. So
big jumps.
Yes. Unpredictable climate up in Pennsylvania.
So that makes me think of one of the things you talk about a lot is nervous system regulation. So how do you regulate when it goes from 9 degrees to 50?
I regulate my nervous system by staying in bed with my cat a little bit longer on the colder days and trying to get up and get the day started on the nicer days.
So jumping on, how do you facilitate change with your clients?
So I facilitate change with clients by guiding them through getting very, very clear on what it is that they want to change and what that outcome looks like. And then kind of reverse engineering. So we have our point A, which is where we are, and our point B, which is where we want to be. And really looking into what the disconnect is, what's keeping us in that point A versus that point B, and reverse engineering that to create some small adjustments that turn into big action steps over time.
So a lot of us, when there's been trauma, the disconnect, we know where we want to be, but we can't get there because of that trauma response. So what can you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So trauma it lives in our body. A lot of times we don't necessarily understand where our trauma comes from or why we are the way that we are, which is one amazing aspect of talk therapy, is to help kind of connect those dots a little bit and put meaning to some of the things that we do. And once we're able to really make that connection, we are able to name what we're experiencing and try to slow down the reaction process and make intentional choices to, again, get us, off the path that we're on that's not working for us and get us on the path that we want to be.
So can you think of any examples of someone you worked with or that you're working with of how you've gotten them to be on that path?
Sure. So an example would be a good example I can think of off the top of my head is relationships. So, a lot of us, whether it was in childhood, growing up with our parents or other caregivers, other children, depending on what that looks like, we keep those those experiences in our bodies and we create meaning out of them. And by creating meaning out of them, I mean that we are finding our place in the world based on these experiences. And so we grow up, we live every day, we become fully functional adults, but we still have these beliefs about ourselves that stem from childhood. Or, maybe we did grow up with a good sense of self, but then maybe we run into some dysfunctional relationships in adulthood. Typically it starts in childhood and we kind of reenact those patterns in adulthood. And then, so we're able to make that connection and no longer reenact some of those dysfunctional relationships, or whether it's the dysfunctional relationships themselves or our contribution to those dysfunctional relationships. So that is a time where we're able to say, okay, why am I being so emotionally reactive to a situation that really isn't creating any sort of threat? Why am I getting so worked up about this? And we're able to trace that back to other times that safety has felt compromised. And although it may not directly relate to something we experienced in childhood, it creates that same feeling in our bodies, that same feeling in our nervous system reenacts itself. And so since the body keeps the score, trauma is stored in our body feels it first, and our mind creates the meaning that our body experiences. And then we react on that in that state of anxiety, in that state of flight or fight mode. So we're just reacting without really knowing why we're reacting. And so when I work with my clients, we talk about being a little bit more mindful of what is going in our body, what's going on, in our bodies, so that we can take that step back, check in with our bodies, give ourselves the extra 5-30 seconds, however long, of grace to then decide, do I want to recreate the same pattern, or do I want to try something a little different this time? And then by choosing to do something a little different, our outcomes look different and probably are something that we're a little bit more proud of or feel better about than that automatic reaction that has taken over in the past.
Right. I know that takes intentional, purposeful recognition of when it's going on, and then also intentional recognition of when those patterns are shifting or we're doing those new patterns that are, for the way we want to live. Mm-hmm. I know for myself over the past few years, and especially this last Christmas, as we had, no litigation, we were done, and just being able to sit and just being peaceful and doing intentional things that I wanted to do, whether it was read a book or play a game with my children, just taking that time to realize, this is what I'm doing and I'm getting so much done that I want to do, was helpful in recognizing, the shift over the past 9 years of my life. And I think it's very helpful just to pay attention and recognize and even journal or track that progress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's so much that can come out through journaling, especially if we just give ourselves that freedom to put pen to paper, mm-hmm. and roll with it, and not judge, not question, not second guess the things that are coming out. There's allowing it to flow. There's so much that we can reveal about what's really going on inside of us and bring those things to light. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Recognizing, my mind's not racing, so I could get this done, and be intentional and purposeful about it. And just, recognizing that that's because I've made this progress can be a beautiful moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and then you talk about being aware and conscious. How can someone start to recognize when that's happening or make even a baby step toward that moment?
That's a good question. And I feel like that is a question that does come up a lot in therapy sessions too, is people will be able to recognize after the fact that they, recreated this pattern, whereas they in the moment, there's a struggle to do so. And I think that one way that has been very helpful for myself and for some of my clients that I've worked with is just taking a deep breath, slow in, slower even out, and giving yourself those extra couple of seconds. So I'm not sure if you or anyone listening has ever heard of Mel Robbins, motivational speaker, another podcaster. She had coined the term the 5-second rule. And the 5-second rule can be very helpful in trying to break us out of that emotionally reactive state, center ourselves very briefly, and give ourselves a moment to make that choice. So, you're talking to a spouse, they say something that sets you off, you're about to respond with a very quick tongue, and instead 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, inhale, exhale, and then deciding what course of action. And another thing that I love to work through with clients, again, is that point A, that point B, where we want to be. And every decision that we make, every choice that we make is going to either bring us closer to our goal, or it's going to bring us a little further away from our goal. So after 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, inhale, exhale slower, what is going to get me towards my desired outcome? And so being honest with yourself about what that desired outcome is, although you might be as frustrated as can be with your spouse in that moment, do you want to build connection or do you want to build resentment? And what decision, what behavior can you engage in is going to get you towards that goal outcome?
Yeah, I noticed that we both have this quote on our Instagrams by Viktor Frankl. And yep. I love him, and I'll put a link to his book in our the show notes. But I think it's perfectly with what you just described. And he wrote this when he was in a concentration camp, which I think is incredible. But he said, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that's exactly what you were just saying. That we have that space aside how we're going to react, and that could be in that moment where you breathe and release.
Exactly. And there's so much empowerment that can come from that. Whereas whenever we engage in that emotionally reactive cycle, a lot of times it's guilt, it's shame, it's not very good feelings. But whenever we are able to take that space between the stimulus and the response, and like the quote says, that's where our growth is, that's where our freedom is, that's where liberation is, empowerment. And so we can feel really good about making those decisions, and then that'll make it easier for us to make that decision again in the future.
And I don't know if you remember this one, but you wrote it on your feed about choosing courage over comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what else about that you wrote?
So I actually have it right in front of me. So yeah, today I chose courage over comfort. I can't make commitments for tomorrow, but today I will choose to be brave, and I know what that means. And I feel like there's so much that goes into that quote. And a big message in that is that change does not come from our comfort zone. It comes from those moments of courage and bravery and vulnerability.
So how does that relate to someone that's trying to, make these changes when they're dealing with trauma and an unhealthy relationship and doing that hard work?
Yeah. So, and although it may sound counterintuitive, engaging in our emotional reactive patterns is comforting. And it may not feel like it, especially afterwards when we just create maybe a bigger mess for ourselves than we ever had intended. But the part of what keeps us in these patterns is our brain, as neuroplastic as it is trying to set us up for safety. And at one point, we were under the impression, under the belief, true or perceived, that these behaviors are keeping us safe. And so our brains fight wanting to do something outside of these patterns that we've built for ourselves. And so there is a lot of comfort in it. It's familiar. It's a little bit more predictable. Even if the outcome isn't what we want, the outcome is predictable. But to do something different is unfamiliar. It's scary. It's dangerous. And I'm using my air quotes. It's dangerous. It's life threatening. And so that's where the courage comes in, the courage to do something that does not come as easily to us for the greater good of ourselves, of our future, of what it is we're trying to build for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So it's similar to when someone has been out of a traumatic relationship and begins a healthy relationship, all of a sudden it becomes weird. Mm-hmm. I don't feel comfortable. Safety's not comfortable. Chaos is.
Exactly. Chaos is comfortable. Getting breadcrumbs from someone is comfortable. It's predictable. Being in an emotionally healthy relationship is scary when you've never experienced that before.
How do you help someone when they're in that situation to recognize it's okay?
To recognize that it's okay
to take those slow steps and change that, the narrative, and start recognizing that, this feels chaotic, this feels scary, but it's okay.
Oh, absolutely. So, right. There's a lot of more anxiety that comes from trying to make those changes and those adjustments. And so I would highly suggest emotional support, some sort of social accountability, someone that is going to remind you of your why while you're also trying to remind yourself of why you're trying to make these changes, someone that you're able to be vulnerable with in the process. So whether that's a therapist, a friend, a loved one. And sometimes that can be hard, especially, in an example of a spouse where maybe they're the ones that are triggering you at times, but they can also be your accountability. And so that takes another level of vulnerability to go back and say, hey, I messed up. Like, this is what I was experiencing, and being honest about that and allowing that person to comfort that vulnerability. And then in addition to that, mindfulness practices are so huge. They're going to teach us how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because whenever we are avoiding the sensations that come with anxiety, we're more likely to get overwhelmed by them. And so when we're just being emotionally reactive, it just creates more emotional reactivity. Whereas whenever we're able to slow down, be inside our inner world, notice our feelings, we can shift that perspective a little bit and get out of that automatic reaction, and instead just kind of disconnect ourselves, detach ourselves from our emotions, and we're able to then have a little bit more control over them. And it makes us build a little bit more tolerance to that feeling of discomfort. And by building that tolerance, we're less likely to get thrown into that fight or flight. So we're in more control. So it's in moments where there's a lot of built up anxiety, but the courage is there, the courage to do something different, I highly suggest mindfulness practices.
So how does mindfulness, and someone is more prone to the freeze or more prone to fight or flight, would you recommend like different practices?
I would say it would come down to personal preference. Some things may work better for some people based on just their personality. I know a lot of people really struggle with meditation because it doesn't feel productive, which I highly disagree. I think the mindfulness meditation is one of the most productive things that we can do for ourselves.
Yes, I gotta be busy.
Right, exactly. And so someone that is, prone to having to be busy, to be doing something, to be moving around, yoga. Because yoga is also something that we're doing. It's physical activity. It's good for our body. It helps move some of that stuck energy or that's around in us, but it also takes a lot of our concentration. It's very hard to, balance on one foot with the other foot straight up in the air and still be thinking about something else going on in life, right? So, and with that, it helps us build discipline around tolerating discomfort, which is the goal in mindfulness as well, is to build tolerance around discomfort.
And we can also do something as simple as walking on grass and
Yeah,
feeling the earth underneath us for someone that can't lay down and listen to music without going stir crazy.
absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is shifting out?
Shifting out. So in terms of in relation to what?
With the fight or flight, and then when you talk about like shift out.
Okay, so shifting out of shifting out of fight or flight. Yeah, so getting ourselves back into a more regulated state, and we're able to shift out of fight or flight whenever we're focused on activating the part of our body that counteracts fight or flight. So fight or flight is part of our sympathetic nervous system. That's where our emotions are. That's where the amygdala is like, well, we are not safe right now. Things are going awry. We need to get out. We need to fight. We need to do literally anything right now. So on the contrary to that would be that the parasympathetic system. So that is the part that is going to need activated to kind of balance out a little bit. And that's where the exhales, the deep exhales in our breathing really come into play. And, tell people, yeah, just breathe. And there's so much resistance to that, but there's so much power in our breath. And it's such an underrated tool. We have a lot of the tools that we need already with us. We just don't give them the value that they need. So whenever we're taking our deep inhales, that is activating our sympathetic nervous system. That is what is the right side of our brain, the emotional side of our brain, the emotional activated side of our body. But whenever we're taking our very slower, and that's why I emphasized slower earlier in this conversation, when we take our slower out breath, that is activating our parasympathetic nervous system. And that is what is going to help us calm down. And then with that, whenever we are in a state of fight or flight, I love to use the analogy with my clients that fight or flight is what is going on with a zebra if it's being chased by a lion, right? It's not like, oh, I'm going to stop and pee real quick. I'm not going to, eat this patch of grass.
Yeah, no, it's survival. It's an instinct. Yeah.
Right. Like there's no time for nothing. Like we gotta go. So another way to show our body that we are safe is drink water. If you can chew gum, even if it's not eating food in that moment, chewing gum, doing things that are little signals to your body that, hey, we're okay right now. And that can even be asking yourself the question or telling yourself the statement, am I safe right now? I can't control what other people do. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what the outcome of this situation is going to be. But in this moment, I am safe. And that is another tool that can help shift our body out of that fight or flight. So again, shifting. It's not a jump. It's a muscle we're building. It's a practice we're building.
Right. Animals in the wild make sounds. And in somatic training, it's about, making a sound as you breathe. It's like, and there's so many videos of Peter Levine doing it, and he's a more good voice than me. I'm tone deaf, so he'd be better to listen to. But I think that works. Funny story too. When I type in my name for like in documents or Word or an email, it autocorrects to amygdala. And I was like, I'm a nerd when I autocorrect my name to amygdala.
That's awesome.
So you have a course coming out, which is exciting. You just want to give a soundbite tip to the listeners on, a couple of things about it so they can be listening out for it, and a clip to or a link to it will be in the show notes. But I think, they could benefit from it. So what can they be looking for?
Yeah, so I have my program coming out called the Physio Life Transformation Program. And as, kind of build up to this moment throughout talking about how, of course, talk therapy, medication, things like that are helpful. But that's not the end. That's not the end game. There's a little bit more that we can do outside of just kind of reconstructing our thoughts. We can get in touch with our bodies. We can befriend our bodies and work through a lot of things that way as well. We can make meaning out of situations, which is fantastic. But then we can also get in touch with our bodies to finish doing that work. And so what we do with the Physio Life program is we're getting the results by getting clear on who we want to be, the quality of life that we really want, and installing the Physio 5 system that will change unfulfilling behaviors and habits with tools that will keep us from getting stuck in that fight or flight mode. So of course, anxiety is very necessary. Again, zebra chased by lion needs that fight or flight. If we are driving down the road and a deer jumps out in front of you and your amygdala is like, oh, danger, danger, slam the brakes. Like that's great. We need that. We need that for survival, but we shouldn't get stuck in that. And that's what the Physio 5 system is there to do for us, to change some of those habits, those routines, those thought processes that get us stuck in this fight or fight mode.
Good. And where can people find you online? It'll be in the show notes as well, but just to give it another shout out.
So you can find me online at alyssasullinger.com. That is ALYSSASULLINGER.com.
Okay. And on Instagram?
And on Instagram, The Change Company. So if you were to type in www.instagram.com/, it'll be thechange_co, CO.
Perfect. Thank you again for joining us. Everything will be in the show notes. And again, look out for the course on Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. And this is, again, kind of a, when you're just out of it. And of course, that Alyssa's working on is when you're ready to make that final change. So kind of could even work in conjunction with each other. And thank you again. Look to see you at the next episode. And thank you for joining us. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. We hope you were able to leave with some renewed hope. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, head to the show notes for more information on the things that we highlighted. And there's also a link to the website for a course that we offer on the same topic, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Thank you again, and please tune in to the next episode.